Alright, let's play a little game. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning, rolling out of bed, heading to the kitchen, and your fridge is gone. Not broken. Not unplugged. Just vanished, like some kitchen appliance magician pulled off the greatest disappearing act of all time. No cold milk for your cereal. No ice cubes for your coffee. No frozen pizza stashed away for those nights when you promise yourself you'll cook but end up watching TV instead. Sounds like a nightmare, right? But here's the wild part: for the Amish, this isn't some apocalyptic scenario. This is just life. No fridge, no freezer, no electricity keeping their food fresh. And yet they're not out here eating spoiled meat and praying they don't get food poisoning. They've got it figured out. And not just figured out, they've been preserving meat for months, even years, without refrigeration. Meanwhile, most of us can't even keep a salad fresh for a week without it turning into some kind of sad, wilted mess. So how do they do it? How are they keeping meat fresh when we can't even keep leftovers from going bad in the back of the fridge? And more importantly, could you survive without modern food storage? Stick around, because by the end of this video, you might be questioning everything you thought you knew about keeping food fresh. And spoiler alert, the secret isn't just about survival. It's about something much, much bigger. Alright, let's start with the big question. Why in the world would anyone willingly live without a fridge? I mean, imagine coming home, opening the kitchen door, and poof, your refrigerator is just gone. No chilled drinks, no frozen pizzas, no late-night ice cream raids. Just warm milk, questionable leftovers, and the slow realization that your entire meal plan for the week just collapsed. Sounds like a horror movie, right? Well, for the Amish, this isn't some post-apocalyptic survival challenge, it's just normal life. No electricity, no modern appliances, and yet, no panic. Why? Because they've got a system that's been working for centuries. But before we get into their meat-preserving wizardry, let's clear up a little misunderstanding. Some people think the Amish reject technology entirely, like they're out here living like cavemen, rubbing sticks together to start fires. Not true. The real reason they don't use refrigeration has a lot more to do with their way of life than a fear of modern conveniences. See, the Amish believe in simplicity and self-sufficiency. They're all about community, hard work, and avoiding anything that might make them too dependent on the outside world. Electricity? That means relying on power companies. Refrigerators? That means depending on a constant energy source. And once you start relying on those things, suddenly you're part of a system that doesn't align with their values. Next thing you know, you're paying an electric bill, scrolling through social media, and ordering takeout at 2 a.m. like the rest of us. So instead of plugging into the grid, they've perfected ways to store food without it. And let me tell you, they didn't just figure something out, like some desperate person trying to keep takeout leftovers cold in a snowbank. Their techniques are so good that people today, preppers, homesteaders, and even food enthusiasts, are actively trying to learn them. And here's the kicker: this isn't even just an Amish thing. Long before we had refrigerators humming in every kitchen, everyone had to do this. Think about it. Our ancestors weren't cracking open a cold soda while waiting for their chicken nuggets to finish in the air fryer. They had to work smart to make sure food lasted, whether it was in the heat of summer or the dead of winter. The Amish? They just never stopped doing it. And here's where it gets really interesting: how they do it. Because let me tell you, this isn't just throwing some meat in a basement and hoping for the best. Nope. The Amish have some seriously clever tricks up their sleeves. And the first one? It's been around so long that ancient civilizations swore by it. And it all starts with a simple ingredient you probably have sitting in your kitchen right now: salt. Alright, let's talk about salt. No, not the kind you throw over your shoulder for good luck or the one that fuels online comment wars. Real salt. The kind that has been keeping meat fresh long before fridges were even a thing. Now I know what you're thinking. Salt? That's it? That's the big secret? Oh, my friend, you have no idea. This isn't just about sprinkling a little seasoning on your steak and calling it a day. The Amish have mastered the art of using salt to keep meat fresh for months, sometimes even years. And here's the wild part: it's ridiculously effective. But before we get into how it works, let's rewind a little. Think about a time before electricity. No supermarkets, no deep freezers, no food delivery apps. Just you, a fresh-cut slab of meat, and the burning question: how do I keep this from turning into a bacterial nightmare? This was a problem humans have been solving for thousands of years. The Egyptians were using salt to preserve meat while they were out here building pyramids. Roman soldiers carried salt-cured meat on long journeys so they wouldn't starve on the battlefield. And medieval folks? They didn't have McDonald's drive-thrus. They had salted meat hanging in their pantries, waiting for the next meal. So yeah, salt isn't just a seasoning, it's a lifeline. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The Amish don't just use salt. They depend on it, and they do it in a way that puts modern food storage to shame. They take fresh meat, beef, pork, even fish, and completely coat it in thick layers of salt. And I don't mean a little sprinkle like you do with fries. I mean burying that meat in salt like it's being packed away for the apocalypse. Why? Because salt is basically the Thanos of food preservation. It eliminates moisture, and moisture is what bacteria need to thrive. No water, no bacteria. No bacteria, no rotten meat. Simple yet brilliant. And the best part? The longer the meat sits in salt, the better it gets. It doesn't just not spoil, it ages. Ever heard of prosciutto? That fancy, dry-cured ham that costs way too much at the grocery store? Same concept. Salt pulls out the moisture, concentrates the flavor, and leaves you with meat that's not only safe to eat but actually delicious. Now, you might be wondering, okay, but doesn't all that salt make it unbearably salty? Yes, if you don't know what you're doing. But the Amish? They've got this down to a science. After the meat has been packed in salt for days or even weeks, they rinse off the excess, sometimes soak it in water, and then it's good to go. And let me tell you, the flavor is next level. And here's where things get even crazier. The Amish don't just stop at salt. Because while salt does a great job keeping meat from going bad, they've got another trick that not only preserves it but makes it taste even better. And it involves something that most people today only associate with backyard barbecues. Alright, so we've covered salt, nature's original food preservative. But here's the thing, salt does an amazing job keeping meat from rotting, but it doesn't do much for the flavor. I mean, have you ever tasted plain salted meat? It's like licking the rim of a salt shaker, not exactly mouth-watering. That's where smoking comes in. And let me tell you, this isn't just about making meat taste good, it's about locking in flavor and making it last for months. Maybe even years. But before we get into the Amish technique, let's take a step back. Who figured out that waving a slab of meat over a fire would make it last longer? Some caveman? Probably. I like to imagine some prehistoric guy accidentally dropping his fresh kill into the fire and, instead of crying about it, taking a bite and realizing, oh wow, this is actually delicious. From that moment on, smoking meat became a game changer for survival. Indigenous tribes, Vikings, medieval butchers, you name it, they all used smoke to keep meat fresh on long journeys or harsh winters. And the Amish? They've taken this ancient tradition and perfected it. Here's how it works. When you expose meat to slow, controlled smoke, you're basically giving bacteria an eviction notice. Smoke contains natural chemicals, like formaldehyde and phenols, that kill bacteria and stop mold from forming. It's like nature's version of vacuum sealing, but way tastier. And if you've ever walked past a smokehouse, you know that smell, the rich, deep, slightly sweet aroma that makes you suddenly crave bacon, even if you weren't thinking about food 2 seconds ago. That's the magic of wood smoke. But here's the trick, the type of wood you use matters. The Amish don't just grab any old firewood and hope for the best. They carefully choose hardwoods like hickory, oak, cherry, and applewood, each one adding its own unique flavor. Hickory? That's your classic, bold, slightly spicy barbecue flavor. Think smoky bacon heaven. Oak? Milder, smooth, a bit nutty, perfect for beef. Cherry and applewood? Slightly sweet, like someone waved a magic wand over the meat and infused it with a touch of caramel. And the best part? The longer the meat sits in the smoke, the deeper the flavor gets. We're talking hours, sometimes days, of slow smoking. The Amish aren't out here rushing things with a gas grill. They respect the process. Now, before you go thinking, okay, but won't the meat just turn into charcoal? Nope. That's the beauty of cold smoking versus hot smoking. Hot smoking is what most people do at a backyard barbecue. Heat, smoke, eat. Simple. Cold smoking, on the other hand, is an art. The meat never actually cooks. It just soaks up the smoke at low temperatures, which means it stays preserved for months without a fridge. And let me tell you, if you've never had properly smoked meat, you're missing out. The flavor is next level. And guess what? The Amish don't even need a fancy smoker from some overpriced grilling store. They've been using simple wooden smokehouses for generations, just a small shack, a low fire, and patience. But here's where things get even crazier. The Amish don't just rely on smoking. Because while smoke is fantastic at keeping meat fresh and flavorful, there's one method that takes it even further, a method so effective, it can keep meat fresh for years. And it involves something you'd probably associate more with your grandma's strawberry jam than with meat preservation. Alright, so we've salted it, we've smoked it, and now, we're about to seal the deal, literally. Because while salting and smoking do an amazing job at keeping meat fresh, there's one technique the Amish use that doesn't just preserve meat for a few months, it can keep it fresh for years. And no, I'm not talking about stuffing it in the back of the freezer and forgetting about it until your next deep clean. I'm talking about canning. Yeah, I know. When most people hear canning, they think of jars filled with pickles, jams, or that mysterious batch of homemade tomato sauce your grandma insists will last a lifetime. But trust me, canning meat? Next level. And get this, it's not even a new idea. Canning goes way back, like Napoleon Bonaparte back. In the early 1800s, Napoleon was out here conquering Europe and realized something. His soldiers were starving. Spoiled food was literally losing him battles. So he threw down a challenge. Whoever figures out how to make food last longer gets a cash prize. A Frenchman named Nicolas Appert took him up on the offer and, after some trial and error, discovered that if you heat food to a high temperature and seal it in an airtight container, it won't spoil. Boom, canning was born. And for his efforts? The guy got a fat payday from Napoleon. Not bad for what's basically the world's first meal prep hack. Fast forward a couple hundred years, and the Amish are still using this technique better than anyone. Why? Because unlike smoking or salting, which slightly change the texture and taste of meat, canning locks in the freshness. It's like hitting the pause button on decay. Here's how they do it. Step 1. Take fresh meat, usually beef, pork, or chicken, and cut it into chunks. No fancy seasoning, no marinade, just straight up, good quality meat. Some folks brown it first for extra flavor, but raw pack canning, yep, raw, works just as well. Step 2. Pack it into jars. And I mean pack it tight. No air pockets, no wasted space. Then, depending on the recipe, they might add a little salt or broth, but no refrigeration, no preservatives, just meat and a jar. Step 3. The magic part, pressure canning. This isn't the same as water bath canning, which is great for fruits and pickles but not safe for low-acid foods like meat. The Amish use pressure canners, which crank up the heat to 250 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to destroy bacteria, seal the jars, and make sure that meat stays shelf-stable for literal years. And when I say years, I mean years. There are stories of people opening canned meat that's been sitting on a shelf for a decade, and it's still perfectly fine. No mold, no slime, no funky smell, just tender, ready-to-eat meat that's as good as the day it was packed. And let's be real, this makes a ton of sense. Power outages? Doesn't matter. Food shortages? No problem. Forget about meal prepping for the week. The Amish meal prep for the decade. Now, before you go thinking, okay, but does it actually taste good? Let me tell you, yes. In fact, a lot of people say canned meat actually tastes better because it basically slow cooks itself inside the jar. You open one up, and you've got fall apart tender beef, melt in your mouth chicken, and pork so juicy it practically shreds itself. Throw it into a stew, slap it on a sandwich, mix it with eggs, instant meal, zero hassle. And the best part? No fridge required. So at this point, you might be wondering, why don't more people do this? Great question. The short answer? Because we got lazy. Once refrigeration became mainstream, people stopped learning how to store food without it. These days, we're so used to tossing everything in the fridge or freezer that we don't even think about long-term storage anymore. But the Amish? They never stopped. They knew that learning how to keep food fresh without electricity isn't just a cool old-fashioned trick, it's a life skill. And honestly, with rising food prices, unpredictable power outages, and a growing interest in self-sufficiency, more and more people are realizing that maybe the Amish had it right all along. But here's the thing, while salting, smoking, and canning are all amazing, they're just pieces of a much bigger system. Because the Amish don't just preserve meat. They have an entire off-grid food storage system that makes sure they never run out of food, no matter what happens. And trust me, once you see how that works, you'll start rethinking everything you thought you knew about food security. Alright, so we've gone through the Amish playbook on keeping meat fresh, salting, smoking, canning, methods that have been around longer than some entire civilizations. And now, we've got to ask the big question. Is Amish-style food storage actually better than modern refrigeration? Now, before you roll your eyes and say, "Of course, a fridge is better, it's literally keeping my ice cream from turning into soup right now," hear me out. Because once you break this down, you might start questioning whether relying on that humming box in your kitchen is actually the best move. Let's start with the pros and cons of each. I'll give it to modern refrigeration, it's ridiculously easy. You don't have to think about anything. Buy meat, throw it in the fridge or freezer, and bam, problem solved. You're not out here building a smokehouse in your backyard or pressure canning meat like a survivalist. And if you want a late-night snack? No problem. Just grab what you need, heat it up, and go back to binge-watching your favorite show. But that is also kind of the problem. We've gotten too comfortable. We don't think about what would happen if the power suddenly went out. And let's be real, it happens. Maybe it's a storm, maybe it's a blackout, maybe it's just bad luck. And when that fridge stops running? Game over. Your meat has an expiration countdown. Frozen food turns into a soggy disaster. And if the outage lasts long enough, you're basically hosting a farewell party for everything in your fridge. Now, compare that to the Amish system. Salted meat? Doesn't care if the power goes out. Smoked meat? Laughs in the face of an electrical failure. Canned meat? Will still be good years from now. So yeah, refrigeration is convenient, until it's not. Shelf life, which method wins? Alright, let's do a little time travel experiment. Imagine you buy a fresh steak today. You've got options. Fridge, stays fresh for about 3 to 5 days before it starts looking suspicious. Freezer, you get a solid 6 to 12 months before freezer burn turns it into a sad, flavorless block of ice. Salted meat, stored properly? It can last months, even a year. Smoked meat can go several months at room temperature, sometimes longer. Canned meat, 3 to 5 years, maybe even longer if you store it right. I mean, come on. Canned meat is basically the cockroach of food, it refuses to die. And this isn't just about keeping meat from rotting. It's about quality. Have you ever defrosted meat that's been sitting in the freezer for months? It's never the same. It gets weird, watery, sometimes mushy. Meanwhile, properly canned or smoked meat tastes like it's fresh, sometimes even better because of all that slow-aging flavor. So, if we're talking long-term survival, the Amish system wins. Hands down. Cost, which saves more money? Now let's talk about something that really matters: your wallet. Running a fridge? Not free. Running a freezer? Also not free. You're paying electricity costs every single day just to keep your food from turning into science experiments. Meanwhile, the Amish are out here storing food for free once the work is done. No electricity. No monthly costs. Just good old-fashioned preservation. And let's not even get into food waste. In modern households, the average person throws away hundreds of dollars worth of food every year because it goes bad before they eat it. The Amish? They don't waste. When you spend days preserving meat, you're not going to let it go to waste. So, over time, traditional methods might actually save you more money than relying on refrigeration. Taste. Which method wins the flavor battle? Let's be honest, does fridge-stored meat taste amazing? Not really. It's fine. It does the job. But it's nothing special. Now compare that to fire-smoked brisket that's been aging in wood smoke for hours, soaking up deep, rich flavor. Salted beef that's been naturally dry aging, concentrating its taste into something bold and intense. Cut meat canned beef that's fall apart tender straight out of the jar. Modern food storage preserves meat. Amish-style storage? It transforms it. What about nutrition? Now, you might be wondering, okay, but is Amish-style meat still nutritious? Good news, yes. In fact, it's arguably healthier. Canning keeps nearly all of the nutrients locked in. Smoked meat? Full of flavor and protein. And salted meat? Packed with minerals. Meanwhile, modern processed foods? Filled with preservatives, artificial ingredients, and who knows what. So if you're thinking about clean, natural eating, the Amish method isn't just effective, it's better for you. Final verdict: which one wins? Okay, so if we're being honest, fridges aren't going anywhere. We all love modern convenience, and let's face it, we're not about to start storing entire racks of salted meat in our closets. But the Amish way is. We've built our entire food system around one assumption: that electricity will always be there. But history shows us that's not always the case. Storms hit. Power grids fail. Supply chains break. And when that happens, the people who know how to preserve food without relying on technology? They're the ones who don't panic. So maybe we don't have to choose one or the other. Maybe the real answer is both, enjoying modern convenience while also learning traditional skills that could be lifesavers when things go south. And speaking of old-school survival skills, the Amish don't just have food storage figured out. Their entire lifestyle is built on self-sufficiency, sustainability, and surviving without relying on the modern world. And if you think their food preservation methods were impressive, just wait until you see this. So, here's the big question: what if your fridge stopped working right now? No warning. No backup generator. Just you, a kitchen full of food, and a ticking clock before everything starts to spoil. Most of us? We'd panic. We'd scramble to find ice packs, Google how long can chicken last at room temperature? And ultimately, we'd be throwing out hundreds of dollars worth of food in a matter of days. But the Amish? They wouldn't even blink. Because while we're out here depending on a giant humming box to do all the work for us, they've been keeping food fresh, without electricity, for generations. And honestly, after learning all this, I can't help but ask, have we gotten too comfortable? Think about it. We have everything at our fingertips: refrigeration, supermarkets, meal delivery apps. But how much of it do we actually control? If the power went out tomorrow, how long would we last? A week? A few days? Less? Meanwhile, the Amish are out here with salted meat hanging in their pantries, smoked beef curing in their barns, and canned chicken sitting on their shelves, ready to eat, no fridge required. And maybe that's the takeaway here. It's not about throwing out your fridge or suddenly becoming a full-time homesteader. It's about realizing that the old ways still work. The Amish aren't just preserving food. They're preserving security. They're preserving independence. And maybe, just maybe, there's something we can learn from that. So, what do you think? Would you ever try Amish-style food preservation? Do you think modern refrigeration has made us too dependent? Or are you just here for the thought of a world where bacon lasts forever? Either way, let me know in the comments. I want to hear your thoughts. And if you like this video, hit that like button, share it with a friend, and subscribe for more deep dives into the survival skills most people have forgotten. Because trust me, there's a lot more where this came from.